to American Education FM, everybody. I'm Dr. Sean Brooks. In this two-part episode, Dr. Robin McCutcheon, Associate Economics Professor at Marshall University, returns, and we discuss the jab, the social impact, the university policies, conflict within faculties regarding a number of different issues, and then in part two, we will continue the discussion and discuss a little regarding the economy, the fake news, a little more jab information, and the silver linings that exist. So with that said, here is part one, and be sure and tune into part two when you get a chance.
In my family, my daughter and son-in-law have both had it. My sister and all her family have had it. The only one who didn't take it was my son, who, when he asked me last year, are you going to get this jab? I said, I'm not taking poison. That's stupid. It's an experiment. Why would I do that? He goes, oh, so he never did it either. And then he went I said, have you seen the ingredients? He goes, no. I said, well, go find them. So he did. And he was like, that's disgusting.
Let me ask you about that then. I mean, how do the two of you communicate given the fact that you're both unjabbed?
I have been blessed with, I was blessed with a father and a family from my dad's side that talked about anything. I don't think there was anything not talked about. And so I always felt like I could talk about anything with my own dad, and that's how I raised my kids. I just talked about anything they wanted to talk about. And so now that they're all grown up, that's still the case. My daughter kind of keeps her own counsel on raising children, and that's her prerogative, but so if my son asked me a question like the one off the cuff way back in January, December, whenever the jabs came out, and he says, what do you think about this? I said, it's a big experiment. He said, are you going to take it? I said, fuck no.
Yeah.
Not taking an experiment. I don't know what's in these. And so he goes, oh, and I didn't tell him not to take it. I just said, I'm not doing it. I think it's stupid to take an experimental drug.
Yeah,
so,
I think the other reason I asked too is because the familial dividing lines that take place where you have certain individuals talking with their parents and then certain individuals not talking with their parents, and then again, it makes me wonder again how the jabbed talk about the unjabbed, and then of course, do you and your son, for example, talk about your jabbed family members? And like what kinds of things are brought up? Because again, that's something that's of course happening in my family, and it's got to be happening in everybody's family. Right.
Well, by the time we went down to visit him in May, and by then, Tim's mom got her first jab in like mid-January, and her second jab, whatever the prescribed days later was, 21 or 28, whatever it was. And within a month, she was diagnosed with aggressive stage 4 breast cancer. Within a month after the second jab.
How is she, by the way?
Well, they tried some kind of chemo / you know how the cancer therapies go, and it put her in the hospital with inflamed intestines, which now makes sense to me since I've seen that video. If your weakness is in your intestines, that's what's going to give out first. So they took her off whatever round of chemo poison they were putting her on, and the statement was from one of Tim's sisters was, well, we're just looking at palliative care, kind of making her comfortable. And I thought, Jesus Christ, that's a death sentence. So, and truthfully, we don't talk a whole lot with them. Ever since one of the sisters emailed Tim and said, you have to go get jabbed. And we wrote back an email, something along the lines of, well, we've talked with our physician, and since we already had COVID, she's recommending we don't get the jab because we've already got antibodies. And the reply back from the sister was, well, keep talking with your doctor, and yeah, do your research, and then get jabbed. And we just ignored it.
Wow.
So between Tim and his family, there's not a lot of talk going on, but they are the two sisters that he has, one of which is a registered nurse. They've all drank the full gallon of Kool-Aid, and when I couldn't actually talk with them very much on the phone and be civil, because I thought you just don't know that you've encouraged your mom to just, she's a walking dead woman at this point. They all are. They just don't know it. Yeah, so we went to visit our son, but long before we got there in May, I had already told him the bad news about Tim's mom. I mean, both of my parents have passed on way before this. So, Tim's parents are the only, basically the only in-laws I have left. They're the only parents that I have left. And, I can see what's coming. It's always inevitable, right? It's just, when does it happen? And so I told my son, I said, there's no reason, if you've already had a flu, you've got the antibodies for this thing. Just, go on living. Take your mask off. He wasn't wearing it by then anyway, because when we were there a year ago, we weren't wearing masks. He says, how come you're not wearing masks? I said, are you kidding? You want me to breathe in all those toxins I just breathed out? No thanks. That's stupid. So apparently my son, who is a lot smarter than all the rest of my family, because he's listening. And I said, wear it or don't wear it. But, when you come down with bacterial pneumonia, don't blame me. You're the one who gave it to yourself.
Yeah.
So I don't know how to talk with people who have drank a gallon of the Kool-Aid. I really don't know. We had a long conversation with our daughter and son-in-law, who came over on 4th of July that weekend, and the first words she said when she got out of the car is, I have to ask if either one of or both of you have gotten the vaccination. I said, no. She goes, well, that's too bad, because then there won't be any hugs with Victor, our grandson. I said, I don't care. I got you standing in the driveway, and I get to see him, so I'll take whatever I can get. But by the end of the day, we were all hugging, and, that whole thing, you can't hug him because you haven't had the jab, kind of went out the window. After a long discussion of how both Tim and I were pretty sure we had COVID, because I brought it home for my students, and my students brought it direct from China. Yeah. So, we're not gonna. And I told Katie, I said, you probably don't remember because you were too little, but when your brother brought home chicken pox from school and I got it, I don't have to go get a chicken pox vaccine because I've already had chicken pox. Right? And it's not like we go once a year to get tested to make sure we still have chicken pox immunity. Some of this stuff is just, it's inane. It's so insane.
Yeah, it's certainly next level, and they even connecting the most simple of dots is not happening. Because again, it tricks so many people into thinking that all they had to do was take 2 jabs to not wear a mask, and yet they're actually saying this in front of someone that they know or are even related to, and that person has never even worn a mask.
Right.
And they can't make that connection.
Right. I don't know. I think what we're observing is a level of psychosis and brainwashing, the likes of which we have never seen. Because these people are so asleep. They're not using 2 brain cells. They're not using any logic at all. They're not using any of their reasoning faculties. They're just sucking it down, hook, line, and sinker. So, but I think there are some things that we can do. Like, for instance, I'm not wearing a mask at school, and we have a mask mandate. They tried to pass a vaccine mandate through the faculty senate, and I wrote an email. I don't know. maybe 3 or 4 days before the faculty senate meeting, I wrote an email explaining how a vaccine mandate was stood in violation of a number of U.S. laws, and I included in the email trail the president, the provost, and the university council, university lawyer. And I haven't heard a word about faculty senate passing a vaccine mandate. Something happened, or it didn't happen.
You know, that's working. I mean, that approach seems to be working with a lot of institutions and even workplaces. I just saw, for example, the other day, and again, it's not just the non-compliance, but I mean the legal aspect. And like you said, simply sending an email saying, okay, you need to read this because you're officially on legal notice. And then bang, 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 you just hit them with these bullet points and these facts and the law. And then there you go. Right.
Yeah, so I think just walking around without a mask is making people curious. I've told my students from day one I decline to wear a mask. It inhibits my breathing. It actually is dangerous to my health. You do what you want, but I decline to participate in such foolishness. And it's a violation of my rights. I mean, people don't know what their rights are. So, how easy it is it to take away someone's rights or have them just offer them over without a fight if they don't know what rights they're surrendering. So I think that just continuing to peacefully decline to participate. I'm not calling it disobedience because those aren't mandates, are not laws. If the university is passing a policy that encourages discrimination, that's a violation of the law. I think it's wrong to say I'm disobeying when in fact what you are doing is you are practicing informed refusal or informed declination. I decline to participate. Does that make sense?
Yeah.
Because they use words against us. If I say to the university, I refuse to comply, then I'm being insubordinate. If I say I decline to participate, then that's not insubordination. That's informed refusal. Informed, I can't even use the word refusal. It's informed declination. You asked what's going on at Marshall University, and I've had a number of run-ins. This is the first semester I've had so many run-ins with students running to the provost and the president to complain about how I'm presenting current information inside of my economics lecture.
Yeah, do tell.
So, how much money is Pfizer making off these jabs? And I make the students go look it up. Oh, they made $32 billion. Wow. But you're still wearing masks. And you got your jabs and you're still wearing masks, so they lied to you. Because they said if you get the jabs, you don't have to wear the mask, and now they're making you mask up.
You should have them go look up who owns the #1 blood clotting drug.
We'll get there, right? Because
or anti-blood clotting, I should say. Yeah.
Yeah.
It's Pfizer.
Yeah. So what I'm doing is I've set up inside of my Blackboard, I've set up a separate folder. I call it the State Science Institute Research Readings, which is kind of a poke in the eye at Atlas Shrugged. And I put in there the research that I've done on the jabs and the various policies, suggestions coming out of the CDC, the FDA, the NIH. I mean, for instance, I posted a document that was a peer-reviewed medical article put out by the NIAID and NIH in 2005, wherein Fauci said, we know hydroxychloroquine is a good therapeutic for SARS-CoV. Oh, that's interesting, because not 14 years later, he turned right around and said, oh, we can't use that. It's not approved. It's not a vaccine. Well, in fact, a therapeutic is a vaccine. My strategy is just to keep posting this research, whatever I find. Like I found an amicus curiae brief just the other day by a law firm, and they're asking Amy Coney Barrett on SCOTUS to look at it, and inside of this amicus curiae brief, they lay out the argument against vaccinations and mask mandates, and not only that, that they provide all of the research that backs up how the vaccines are still emergency use authorization, even though there was that fancy-dancy, sleight of hand the FDA tried to pull in August about approving a drug that is the exact same ingredients as the Pfizer-BioNTech COVID-19 vaccine called Comirnaty, which isn't being produced in the United States. Because if it was, they would have to put out all the warning labels, and it causes this and perhaps could cause that. So it's not even under production, not until 2024. And the sleight of hand was, but we're still extending the EUA on the Pfizer-BioNTech vaccines. So, it's this kind of sleight of hand and hoodwinking that the FDA and the CDC and the NIH have been pulling at least as long as, this whole pandemic has been going on. So I just keep posting my research, and funny, students go read that. And I had one student complain to the president that I was posting misinformation, and I thought, that's interesting. These are documents straight out of the NIH, the FDA, the CDC, NIAID. That's interesting. If it's misinformation, how does he know?
And just that phrase, just that saying misinformation gives that person away. It's like when somebody uses the word debunked. When someone says those words, you know that they haven't looked anything up or looked into anything. They're just relying on, the standard dismissive language so that they themselves feel more comfortable instead of actually coming face to face with reality.
Right. Well, you can only ignore reality so long, right? The actions and choices have consequences, and consequences are real. So I'm afraid that some of these people who have gone off and had the experimental vaccine will discover that their actions really do have consequences, at least the people who didn't get the saline. It's an awfully harsh lesson. The people who see that will begin to wake up. And people are beginning to wake up already. We've got whistleblowers coming out of hospitals. We've got whistleblowers coming out of doctors. Dr. Malone and 3,000 other doctors have signed a document basically demanding that these vaccines be halted. Rainer Fulmich out in Germany, a lawyer from the European Union out there, he's taking people to court, and he will be hauling them up in front of the Hague. So, we're looking at a Nuremberg 2 situation. Who's been actively, willfully, volitionally participating in these they're going to get hammered.
Let me ask you this from a student standpoint, or I suppose a teacher / professor standpoint, because I've met some of these individuals, and it's absolutely heartbreaking to listen to what they have to say, but sort of the realization that they've come to. Have any of your students who have been jabbed come to you with quote unquote vaccine regret?
No, I have not asked students if they've been jabbed or not. I figure it's none of my business, just like it's really none of their business to ask me.
Right, but just in like the information sharing that you've done, and they've thought to themselves, damn, I've been jabbed, and then they end up learning more. No one has just come to you and said, hey, look, you know a lot about this. I took this, I'm starting to regret taking this. Is there anything I can do?
Well, I've had one student come to me and tell me that he's been sharing the information I've posted in this folder with his own family, some of who have been jabbed, who are now kind of looking at this going, oh crap, what have we done? I had another student that I just sort of I went through all of the facts and information about what's in the jabs. I even had lists of the jab ingredients, and I said, this SM-102, this is like embalming fluid. And after I got all done telling him about all of the nasty stuff inside of these jabs, he looked at me and his face was pale. And I looked at him and I said, "You okay?" And he goes, "I took the jab."
See.
And I said, "Oh, well, forget about everything I just said. Just, He goes, "No," he says, it's better to know, but I wish I'd known this before I got it. And I said, "Well, when you got the jab, were you informed about any of this, the possible potential side effects?" He goes, "No." So were you given any information? He said, "No." And I said, "So whoever gave you the jab violated the Nuremberg Code, Section 1, Paragraph 1, the first sentence, which is there must be total informed consent. It's absolutely required." So all of these places that are still giving out jabs, and I did ask my students on day one, I said, "Now, I don't want to know who did it, but were you given any information about how masks affect your health when you wear them for a long time?" No. They shook their heads no. I said, "Were you given any information about the jabs?" No. I said, right there, the whoever encouraged you and whoever gave you the jab and these return to school papers that you've signed mandating that you wear masks and such, they're already violating your rights. The requirement to wear a mask is emergency use authorization only. All of them. Except for the form-fitting, tight-fitting N95 masks, which, nobody's wearing those. Those are, surgeons use that to keep their stuff out of the patient. But they don't wear the mask all day long. They only wear it while they're in surgery. So, the amount of lying that's going on is just over the top. And some of these people don't realize that they're perpetuating a lie. They're just totally ignorant of what's going on. But there are some people who know that what they're doing is wrong. I mean, I've seen at least a half a dozen videos of men or women at school board meetings saying, "You are violating this law, and you're violating that law, and you're violating the Nuremberg Code, and you're getting paid for all of this. This is how much money your school got, or your school, community school got from the federal government, either through the CARES Act or one of the other, massive COVID bailouts. You're using this to promote this lie." The truth is winkling itself out so it's in front of people's eyes. Most people, I think, are going to wake up to it, and they're going to have a day of reckoning where either their health is permanently impacted, so they can't not face reality, or they're going to see it happen in their family, like we've seen happen in our families. And if it really is true that on the first jab it destroys half your immune system, your white blood cell producing organs in your body, if it really is true that it destroys half of that on the first jab and another 25% on the second jab, and your immune system is down to 25%, and on the third jab they introduce HIV just to kill you off even faster, the amount of die-off that we're going to see is just going to be heartbreaking.
I want to back up real quick just to one particular thing that you mentioned. When you were looking at your students and you were asking them about, did they know anything about the harmful effects of the masks and the jabs, and they were shaking their heads no. The next, and of course, we assume that they're wearing masks, and we assume that the majority are jabbed. The one step that's just missing is just thinking, because you want to look at them and you want to say, did you think about looking that up? Did you think about how this might not be a good thing? Did you think about, you know, finding an alternative voice or talking to other people? I mean, it's just that individual. It's the complete absence of any individualized thought that is the overwhelming problem. But then again, it's the education system that has done that to countless people, including instructors and teachers and what have you, for a very long time. So I'm not surprised by it, but I don't know. You want to grab them by the lapels sometimes and just say, "Did you even just think before you plunged a needle into your arm?"
Yeah, I agree. Um, we have an education system that has so dumbed down several generations of people that there's no thinking going on, which is and I still to this day I can't tell you why I did it, but on day one I plunged into a tirade about the masks and how they're harmful to your health, about the jabs and how they're experiments only, and the quarantining and isolation and how that violates your 14th Amendment of, you know, you can't be illegally imprisoned. And so how shocked should I be that some student runs to the president and says, you got to shut this woman up? Which of course I can't do, right? Because I'm contracted. I'm employed by contract under an academic freedom policy passed by the state of West Virginia. And also I sued the university in 2018 for an administrator violating my academic freedom, and they settled with me. It's okay, we'll support your academic freedom. So anything that I say in class that I wind into an economic outcome of policy is fair game, and I just plunged right into it on day one. And well, what I've noticed is, and I've never worn a mask on campus or in my classes, and what I've noticed is over the last 4 or 5 weeks, there's a lot more students not wearing masks.
Good. I was going to ask you that. I was going to ask. That's great. And, well, not to mention the other thing too, from the you know, the pseudo discipline of what the students are trying to do to you, or what some of them were trying to do to you. From a behavioral standpoint, even that behavior is part of the dumbing down of the American mind and the brainwashing of the young American mind to actually think to themselves, wait a minute, this person just said something I disagree with. I'm going to go complain to their to their boss, quote unquote. I mean, that's outrageous, but it's clearly taken 20 plus years at least to get people to the point where they actually think that's fine.
Right.
Both adults and students alike, which is really horrible.
Right. So on that first day after my first class, it only took 40 minutes for an associate dean to show up at my office door. And she told me that a student from my class talked with the president and just told him that I went off on a tirade about masks and the COVID policy and so forth. And so the president pulled in the provost and said, I thought you told me that McCutcheon wasn't going to do anything for 2 weeks. And so the provost called up the dean, and the dean looked around the dean suite and took a straw poll for someone brave enough to come up and confront me about this. Now, none of them had the balls to do it. So they sent this poor associate dean, whose physical body is rather frail, but she's a gentle woman, and she came to my office to tell me that I had kicked the beehive over. And I said, good, that's what I intended to do. And she said, well, you know, we just really want you to stop talking. I said, you mean you want me to self-censor myself? That's still censorship. We have academic freedom here. I can talk about anything I want to in class as I'm winding it into economics, which is exactly what I did. And she said, well, you know, we're just having a really tough time with this. And I said, I don't care. I think you guys are on the wrong path. I think you've taken the advice of people on your COVID task committee who are not doctors. They are not board certified physicians, and they are making medical recommendations that they have no license to recommend. So so that was day one. Tuesday was a Tuesday, so I didn't go into school because I don't have class. But the third day, I got a visit by the chair of the department with the same issue. And when I repeated, I have academic freedom, and he says, well, what am I supposed to tell the dean, the provost, and the president? I said, you tell them that I said to butt out, or I'll go tell them. I'm happy to go tell him. He goes, no, that won't be helpful. And I said, well, you tell him I said stay out. Then the next week I had another complaint, and the chair came back to my office, and he said, well, the provost got another complaint, and he's thinking that what he needs to do is sit down and coach you. I said, coach me? Oh, coach me. Like, tell me what to say and tell me what to do in my class. That really would be interesting. I would have to record that meeting because that would be an instant foot over the line of my settlement. When he came back the fourth time to my office to complain, I handed him a copy of my contract with the university with the paragraph circled, the criteria under which I was hired and employed, which is Title 133 from the Higher Education Policy Commission of West Virginia, academic freedom. And he says, well, I don't really pay that much attention to policy. And I said, I know, I can see that, but I do.
No kidding.
I do. And I'm telling you right now that if you pursue this, it's beginning to feel a lot like harassment. If you pursue this, every time you guys show up, I write it down and I send myself an email of the things that we've talked about. So I'm making a paper trail, and I'm sending it to myself to record what you guys are saying to me. So that afternoon, he said, well, now we've had an official complaint. I said, okay, what's an official complaint? He goes, well, one of the students actually used the web link on Marshall's website to officially complain about you. I said, well, I'll tell you what, you just make a copy of that complaint and file it in my personnel file right next to my settlement. And I'll just keep track of how many people complain, and that's how I will be able to tell I'm being effective. And I said, because, do you know which class the student is in? Well, no. Do you know what the student was complaining about? Well, no. Well, you want me to address something that you know nothing about. That's stupid. Either send me the complaint that the student made and I will address it, or tell everybody up the line that they can I didn't have very many kind words at that point. Just tell them to butt out. So they sent me the student's complaint, and the first sentence in my response to that was, professors at Marshall University are employed and contracted under Title 133 of the Higher Education Policy Commission, Series 9, Academic Freedom. And I stated I included the entire paragraph right off my contract. I haven't heard a word from them, not a peep. Nobody's come back to my office.
And there you go. One. And they don't read their contracts, so you're good as gold.
That's right. So when I sent the email, today's Tuesday, so I sent the email a week ago Sunday, where I included the president, the provost, the deans, and the lawyer, including all of my representatives for our college on Faculty Senate, and including the Faculty Senate president, and I sent them this email saying, you can't mandate these vaccines. You're violating. Not only are you violating the university policy, and I quoted the policy in the email, but you're violating U.S. law, and you're violating the Nuremberg Code because you're not giving anybody any information. So, I'm done asking nicely. Now I'm demanding. Don't go this way. And as far as I know, they haven't. That just disappeared, kind of like a fog in the morning when the sun hits it.
Here at Miami University, they've got a jab bus, apparently at least one bus that just kind of moseys around town and parks itself on campus and opens up its windows and just jabs whoever wants to get a jab. Um, Given the fact that Marshall University is receiving $27.8 million to basically implement all of this nonsense, is there a jab bus making its way around the campus there?
I haven't seen a jab bus, but there is a sign, one of those highway signs that has messages on it that says free COVID-19 vaccines at this address, and it's, down the street a little ways. So I haven't seen a jab bus, but they're definitely trying to drum up business. Now, the other thing that Marshall has done is they've taken, I'm sure they've taken quite a chunk of nice money to build their own COVID-19 vaccine dashboard. Right on Marshall's website, just go to marshall.edu and type in the search bar COVID. And the first or second link that pops up is this dashboard. Now, I was told by the provost, personally, before school started, that they just wanted 2 weeks to get the percentage of students up over 70%, and they would stop all this nonsense. Well, we're way past 2 weeks, and we're way past 70%, and the nonsense is still going.
The last time we talked, that roughly 80% of the staff is jabbed, correct?
It's now at 86%. So let's pretend for a moment that half of the people who have been jabbed get the nasty stuff, either the middling, really the middling stuff, or the really, really nasty stuff. Let's pretend just for a moment that the people who got the saline is half of the population and everybody else got the poison. And if this stuff really is killing off immune systems, then let's see. And it's killing off immune systems pretty quickly. So by the time we get to what would be our traditional cold and flu season, actually probably hit when allergies hit, right? Because your body won't be able to combat even that. So we should be seeing a bloom in cases of, I can't even call it COVID because the PCR test is a fake.
Right.
Right? The PCR test can't determine between COVID, SARS-CoV-2, and any other influenza. So the PCR test is a fake. But let's say that half the population that had the jabs got the bad stuff, and half of those people get really sick. Well, that's a quarter of the population of professors who are now not going to be able to teach. Who's going to teach those classes? And that was one of the things that I told the provost. I pulled him aside. We had a faculty day, and I pulled him aside, and I said, "You've got to stop this. You've got to stop this. Just make it stop because this is not good." And I said, "Look around. You see all these faculty here from the College of Business. If 80% of them have taken this jab, that means that it is possible, if they all got the poison, that by the time we get to January, half of these people could be dead." And he says, "Well, they're encouraging us to get the booster shot." And I looked at him, and this is the only time I've asked somebody, I said, "Did you get the jab?" He goes, "Yeah, I got both of them." He said, "And now they're encouraging me to get a third one." And I said, "Dear God in heaven, please don't do it." He goes, "Well, there's a lot of pressure."
Jesus Christ.
And I said, "Avi, we're talking about your life. Your life. Not your career.
Yeah.
Your life."
Did he not even hear the first sentence out of your mouth, which is half of these people could be dead?
I looked at him and I shook my head and I said, "Well, better get my Kleenex box because probably going to be going to a lot of funerals." He is from somewhere in India, so he's naturally dark complected. His face got pale when I said that. I said, "Look around, because half of these people could be dead by January. Dead. Not just not teaching. Gone. This is serious. You have to make this stop." And he says, well, look, we just need 2 weeks. And I said, I've heard that crap before. I heard 2 weeks to flatten a curve. We're 18 months into this nonsense. You have to make it stop. You have to know what your rights are so that you can know when someone's trying to take them from you. Now, it's pretty obvious that somebody shows up at my front door with a gun that they're going to take my rights. It's not so obvious when students are required to sign a return to school policy that demands that they wear a mask every time they're out of their dorm room. That's not so, especially if they don't know. So you have to know what policy is. These laws are here for us to lean on to make the scumbag politicians and administrators who aren't going to uphold them to hold their feet to the fire. And apparently that's my job on campus now, because it doesn't seem like anybody else is speaking up. In fact, I got a whole bunch of people from the College of Business who signed on to a petition to demand that the university demand that everybody get the jab. The person who sent out that petition, I sent them back a hotly worded email, and I never heard back from them. So as far as I know, there's nobody on campus but me saying, you got to stop. You have to stop this crap. You have to start thinking. You know, we raise our kids saying, don't take drugs from people you don't know. And now we're telling everyone, take these experimental drugs from people you don't know. You know, the Vaxmobile, at Whole Foods. You don't know these people. You don't know what's in this drug. Use 2 brain cells and figure it out. Just 2 brain cells. That'll work.
Yeah, but you can get free chicken McNuggets, Robin. And, you know.
That's right. You can get free chicken McNuggets. When the state of West Virginia and the state of Ohio started doing that Vax-A-Million lottery.
Oh, yeah.
And I'm thinking to myself, oh my God. So, you know, this is the clear violation of the Nuremberg Code. You're not supposed to threaten people, nor are you supposed to reward people. You are to leave the decision up to the person on whom the experiment is going to be implemented. And if a person knows who's involved in the experiment, in the producing of the experiment, if they know that the experimental drug has hazardous side effects, they are supposed to stop immediately. So this is it never was about your health. It never was about keeping people safe. It's all about power and control. This little team we have on campus, the COVID-19 team, there's not one of them that is a board-certified licensed medical physician, and they are reveling in the amount of power they think they have over people on campus. And places like Marshall are just going to be sued into oblivion. When the lawyers finally figure out that these foundations have hundreds of millions of dollars in the bank, there's not going to be anything left.
See, that's just it.
Which should make us happy, right, Sean? Because the communist education system will finally collapse.
I was just going to say, I don't think Marshall's going to exist. I don't think Miami's going to exist. I don't think these places are going to exist. I mean, you're going to have 3 groups of people, potentially more. You're going to have those that are awake, like us. You're going to have those that are damaged or dead. And then you're going to have those that are still alive, clinging to life and figuring out what's just happened to their damaged or dead family members who were a part of these institutions. So I don't know who in those groups could possibly continue to attend. You know, it's just math. It just doesn't seem like anybody would be left to attend.
That's true.
Let me ask you this too, because I wanted to just mention and then lead into again some of the other things that might be going on at Marshall that you can provide insight on. But here's what's going on around here: the local public school system within the last week, the entire 8th grade closed down. They just stopped. Wow. They stopped going because there are too many sick kids and too many sick teachers. And according to a wonderful lady who works on the inside, and we communicate on a regular basis, she says she goes, I mean, she didn't say at least 100%, but I mean, she said it's practically 100% of the staff and non-teaching staff have all been jabbed. So, I mean, this is a public school system with one high school, one middle school, and 3 elementary schools. And they're masking everybody. Everybody's masked. 100% again of the staff are jabbed. And now they've closed down the entire 8th grade, but they still decided to have the 8th grade football game, which pissed off a lot of parents. Pissed off a lot of parents, as you might expect. The contact tracing is what the administrators are having to do the majority of the time while they're not doing discipline. Which I've brought this up in particular in the last podcast episode, was if they haven't laid out their discipline policies clearly, and they're disciplining students, for example, the mask slips below the nose, so you have to go to detention, and that's happening, then they're breaking their own policies and their own contracts and the law legally by enforcing things that are not written down, that people are not signing off on, in particular parents, students, teachers, etc. They're just winging discipline and throwing countless students into these areas. But the contact tracing is, again, what the vast majority of the administrators are having to deal with. And then you go outside of the school system into the town. The town, in particular Miami University, is now contact tracing countless individuals, not just students, but people that students have talked to, and they're hiring students to do this contact tracing. And Miami is getting probably the exact same amount that Marshall is, if not more. It could be upwards of $42 million, if I'm not mistaken. But they're paying students to then be Gestapo with their peers, and then with anybody else that they, of course, have contacted. If somebody knocks on the door and they say, wearing masks, and they say, "Hi, we're from Miami University, and we know that somewhere along the line you were in contact with someone who was in contact with someone who tested positive for COVID, and they attend Miami University, so we need to ask you some questions." It's just nuts, because you know that that's actually happening. I mean, that has to be happening. So my question is, of course, the answer would be shut the door and then tell them to go to hell, or, just shut the door and don't talk to them. But my question is, at Marshall University, are you aware of the contact tracing that's probably taking place? And if so, I mean, what are even students discussing and talking about that? Because it sounds like a full-time job. And it sounds like a training program, clearly, for fascism, if not just full-blown Bolshevism.
We do have students and faculty are supposed to participate in the contact tracing. Now, of course, I have declined to participate completely.
They want you to participate in it.
Yeah. It's that was part of their rules.
Oh my God!
That the COVID team put out, and again, I've declined to participate. I've been randomly selected 6 weeks in a row to go get tested. I've declined to participate. Now, what I'm doing is I'm just filing these email away, because my thought is there's no teeth behind this. They're being bullies, and nobody's calling them on it. But I want to see if there's teeth behind this, because I don't think there is. And I haven't heard the students talk about contact tracing, but I know that they had to participate, that they had to sign a form pledging that they would participate in contact tracing. So I'm sure it's going on. I haven't heard anyone talking about it. But, now that you've brought it up, maybe some student will come to me and say, "Hey, this is going on." Yeah, well, I told you at the beginning of class that this form they had you sign was illegal. I told you this. That's a violation of your Fourth Amendment right. to be secure in your persons and effects. That's the quintessential definition of surveillance, isn't it?
Yeah.
Yeah. So I guess we have to wait and see how this rolls out. But I suspect that if somebody from administration comes to me and says, hey, we've noticed that you're not participating, I will say, I have declined to participate. And I'm pretty sure they don't have any teeth to back this up. I'm also pretty sure I know a damn good lawyer who would love to make, $10 or $12 million. Because that's the very least I'd go after him for.
That's something I brought up in the last episode too. Is a lot of this hinges on being able to find an awake lawyer. Because again, if you're coming in contact with a lawyer who's saying, you know what, they have the right, it's a pandemic. Here's my mask. I wear it. I've been jabbed. I mean, clearly that's not a lawyer that you're going to want to represent you. But that's true. Yeah, and finding those good lawyers, I think, is going to get harder and harder. And the same thing is true with the judge who would actually want to take up a particular case, in particular if it's criminal.
I don't know. I think money talks, and I think when the lawyering profession figures out how many millions of dollars are up for grabs, I think you might find a lot more lawyers who are willing to play.
I sure hope so.
That's just my thought. I know there's a guy out of Ohio. I think his name is Tom Rentz.
Yep.
I mean, he's up to his eyeballs in lawsuits, going after employers and agencies and so forth. But not because he wants the money, but because he wants to stop all of this nonsense. He doesn't care about the money, or so he says. I'm sure it's good money, but so there's at least one, and if there's one, I'll bet you there's more. It's a little bit like the direct primary care. It kind of started off very soft and quiet, flew under the radar for, I don't know, probably a decade. And now you can't throw a stone without hitting a direct primary care physician somewhere between you and me. We're only 180 miles apart. So it's not going to take that long. I mean, look, we started these vaccines in December? We're less than a year from the original start of the vaccines. And it doesn't take people, especially lawyers, too long to sniff out big pots of money. They might red pill themselves just with, all of the digging and research. And then they're gonna smell blood in the water, and then they're really gonna swarm. So I don't think it's gonna take too much longer, put too much longer in quotes, but at some point this is gonna turn into a feeding frenzy. Because lawyers, they've got to support themselves too, and the only way they can do it is to have clients who are either able and willing to pay, or a pot of money that they can dig into at the end of the rainbow. At least that's how it appears to me.
Thank you for listening to American Education FM. Make sure and check out AmericanEducationFM.com for more information. Take care and God bless.